Jai Guru, everyone.
Hi, Guru, and welcome to chapter 9, a brand new chapter. And we have the lovely Chris and Priyanka with us today. Mike is away for today, but he will be back next time. And we are going to talk about the title first. It's a very intriguing title, and it's called The Blissful Devotee and His Cosmic Romance. And I wondered from you two how you felt when you first read this title, if you can remember, if you had any feelings or anticipations about what this might hold, and also why you think it might be called this. Yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, firstly, it's a really, really good title, isn't it? It speaks of like really a lot of devotion, and also there's the Guruji's got a book called The Divine Romance, which you get reminded of when reading this title. But I was a bit something I haven't yet worked out. Is the blissful devotee, is it Mukunda or is it Master Mahasaya? Or is it both? Because even though he's quite an exalted guru at this time, Master Mahasaya, or a saint at the very least, he himself considers himself quite a small, doesn't he? He refers to himself as M, for example. So, and he, a child of Divine Mother, etc. So we don't know if it's he could equally be talking about himself. We don't know.
I have to say, I felt like when I have read the chapter and thought about the title, I feel like the blissful devotee is Master Mahasaya. But then again, it could just be how you relate to the chapter, right? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, it was such a good question. Actually, I'm glad, Prek, you sort of raised it. Who are we talking about? And whenever you said it's probably Master Mahasaya, makes sense because we've talked about it before. This book is an autobiography of a yogi, and you would mistaken that to be really about Yogananda. And this story, this whole chapter is, young Mukunda's in it. And as we're going to talk about, there's many revelations, there's realizations, there's probably a lot of building blocks for him as a teenager at this point he would have been, and the development that he had at this point in his life. So I think Master Mahasaya was very important in his life, and yeah, we get to delve into it. But this is really more about Master Mahasaya, isn't it? This chapter in some ways. And so I think whenever you were highlighting, is it about Yogananda, Mukunda, or Master Mahasaya, I think it's the latter. So I would agree with you there, Priyank. It's a good observation. To be honest, whenever I was reading this the first time, the previous chapter, if we think about it, is quite scientific, isn't it? Quite talking about the sort of the scientific process and tools, and we went into it in some detail in the last episodes about actually the hidden depths of the lessons and spiritual teachings and the wealth and everything that we can pull out of that chapter. And I probably skimmed over them a little bit when I first read it. So we kind of went from that sort of westernized scientific sort of approach in the previous chapter, at least it was perceived that way by me the first time. And then the title is very much different. It's Blissful Devotee and the Cosmic Romance. It's very romantic, very spiritual, and it sort of tilts away from that sort of Western scientific investigative angle that Yogananda was trying to bring to the table. So it's nice how he balances the two. He talks about the scientific outlook, of India and everything, and it brings us back to really, what he wants to talk about, which is God and Divine Mother and everything else. So it's a nice tilt by Yogananda there.
Yes. And we open this chapter with Master Mahasaya speaking. And he says, I'm going to read it verbatim. "Little sir, please be seated. I am talking to my Divine Mother." What a way to open the chapter, really. Yeah, Priyank.
So personal, isn't it? With the words "my," obviously it's not just his, but you get the sense that he's just his life is just him and Divine Mother. So it doesn't matter like about the rest of the world or whoever's watching or judging him or thinking that he's insane because he's like eyes are turned upwards. He's just in pure communion all the time. It's a very personal relationship, isn't it? And it's important to have a personal relationship with God.
Very. I also found it interesting how he says, I am talking to my Divine Mother, not with, as if it potentially is a one-sided conversation right now. As we know, perhaps it wasn't as we go through the chapter. But yes, so then after that, Guruji says that he had entered the room in great awe. And I also like to highlight this bit because it seems that Guruji has written this chapter, this introduction, in not unchronological order. So I wonder at what point Master Mahashai spoke and why Guruji decided to open it with language rather than description. Yes, but we are given an introduction to the appearance of Master Mahashai. And just as a nod again, this is not Lahiri Mahashai. This is a different person for anyone who might be confused. Yes, and he said he was dazzled by his appearance. And yes, I think Priyank, if you would read out the way that Guruji describes him, please.
Yeah, sure. With silky white beard and large lustrous eyes, he seemed an incarnation of purity. This is really beautiful words, isn't it? And he mentioned that it dazzled him, his appearance, and like people of that kind of saintliness, they and gurus especially, they do dazzle you, don't they? Got this like glow, don't they? And not even necessarily saints or gurus, even like elevated disciples or devotees that you may see around. You can see the kind of glow. Some people at the center as well.
Yes. And then it also, oh yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, the reflection of God's light, isn't it? The internal stillness and the reflection of that, I think, is almost literal, isn't it? When Guruji, some pictures you see of Guruji's face, it looks like it's illuminated, doesn't it? It really, in his eyes are just illuminated and everything. So you really see that reflected in the great ones.
Yeah. And then it says here that he has this, Master Mahashai has an upraised chin and he's folding his hands and he's in the midst of being devoted and perhaps praying to his mother. And I'd like to talk about this upraised chin thing because we're taught when we meditate to keep the chin parallel, right? But sometimes I do find naturally that the chin does want to upraise a little. And I wondered just about this. It's quite curious. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I suppose I've thought that myself. I think depending on what sort of school of thought or who your guru is, they might say one thing or another. So some might say tilt your head up because it actually assists the eyes to look that way. But in SRF, we're certainly taught to keep the chin level with the floor. But ultimately, I think it's really what helps you relax and keep that posture, be as still as possible, and keep your eyes between, the point between your eyebrows. So I personally don't think there's actually that one strict way of doing it. It's more really, get that works for you, get that technique that works for you best. And sometimes I think more devotionally, I would end up raising my chin up because I'm praying, I'm trying to talk to God, and really urging, I'm willing to. Sometimes I tend to find that I'm looking up just by virtue of striving a little bit, so can't help it.
Yeah, agreed, Chris. It also wants, as Lauren said, it wants to raise up, because if we're focusing our intention at the Christ Consciousness Center, kind of like you want to go higher and higher, and there's a physical tendency to go higher and to raise, and then to raise the chin, so and the head as well back. But obviously, Guruji advises us to keep it parallel. It's only the eyes that should go up. Because otherwise there could be a danger of you just continuously like going up, and then you strain your back, strain your neck.
Probably not helpful for the life energy to flow either, is it? But on Master Mahasaya, Priyank did actually find a really lovely section in the book that he recommended last week. Can you remind us of the title of that book again, please, Priyank?
Yes, it's called The Gospel of Ramakrishna Paramahansa. And so, as you say, Master Mahasaya is basically essentially a diary of Master Mahasaya, and it's about 1,000 pages long. And as apparently, as soon as he completed it, he left his body. It was to the publishers, and then he left his body. His work on this plane was done.
That's amazing. My goodness. So yeah, if you'd like to read more on that, there's some more about how Master Mahasaya looked, and obviously his life. It's very interesting.
Yes, I can describe him a little bit more, actually.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, he used to just talk about his guru like night and day, and he used to be very well versed in all those things. So, but the description that Guruji gives is equally very nice as well. That's sweet.
Yeah. So then we have the effect of the saint's words upon little Mukunda. So he said, "Little sir, please be seated. I'm talking to my divine mother." And Guruji says that it actually produced a very violent effect that his nature had so far experienced. That's a very large reaction, isn't it? And probably unexpected. I certainly feel like I didn't expect such a strong response to what he said. But he goes on to explain. Oh yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, it's a bit frightening, isn't it? He says it's a violent. He calls it a violent effect. So you can imagine him kind of seething, reeling, perhaps, and not just like gently as you might be if a master was in your presence, but he says violently. So, and I've been around when people are near their guru, they sometimes have this kind of like venom-like effect. And even when they're meditating and they're not aware their guru's presence, in India, for example, if someone's meditating, I've seen this, if someone's meditating and the guru just happens to walk past, like behind him, and his eyes are closed, but because the guru's in near proximity, will literally shake, violently shake. So it's pretty mystical how this happens. And I always wonder if it's to do with dharma that we need to burn in terms of the impact the guru has on us, like physical things that we're working out. For example, if we have that kind of reaction, rather than the more natural one that we would expect, which is one of like peace and calmness and joy that we're used to when we're meditating.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you don't often think about until you read something like this, and it makes you introspect, doesn't it? So yeah,
Guruji but he also said so far in his life, which is shocking, really, isn't it? Because he's had some pretty phenomenal things that have happened in his life, not just the darshan of those mystical saints, but he's like a darshan of Divine Mother herself, like when he was younger, and his birth, and as we read in Medita, his birth mother, he kind of like, brought her back. Master Mahasaya was involved with that as well. And Lahiri Mahasaya came to him when he was young, right? When he was taking those fruits from those trees on his way home from school with his brother. So these are quite very, very mystical happenings. But he's saying this specifically is the most violent impact. And I think as we read the rest of this section, we'll find out why it is so violent. But yeah, read on. Oh, Chris.
Just to go back actually to the violent shaking and everything. I did think about this myself, and I didn't want to jump in because I thought there probably is some well-read person out there that's talked about this in the past. And I found something that really talks about the Kundalini energy being either released at a certain time or just really being moved in a certain way by the guru, by the guru's presence, even so the Kundalini energy really cleaning any clogged nadis and meridians, and that sort of causes the body to twist and shake in that way. And the voices, the shrieking, I don't know, but that seems to make sense. That's really what looks to be happening in many senses. But yeah, sorry, just to make a comment on what you were talking about there, about Yogananda or young Mukunda. That really shocked me when I read this. He said the indescribable torture of the spirit, and he was moaning on the floor in this instance when he was with Master Mahasaya. I thought to myself, here's someone who's sought out saints, and he's been around saintly people, and he's met many people who are sages and enlightened people, I'm sure. And he's been seeking out his guru. He's been on this mission, and here he is, moaning on the floor in the presence of Master Mahasaya. So that, for me, shows the stature of this liberated saint, which is unrivaled to anybody that he's met so far. But that was my interpretation. I thought, wow, this really must be, because Yogananda as Mukunda, very attuned. This must be someone who's to be considered very highly evolved and enlightened.
And I feel like it gives that impression in our brains to think, oh, well, this must be something very serious indeed. And we find out why. And he tells us that he thought the most anguish that he'd experienced was his mother's death, his birth mother. But now he has this consciousness that he is separated from his divine mother. And that to him, he says, is, I quote, an indescribable torture of the spirit. And this really made me think about my own being and life. And I think, well, how am I in that consciousness? Like, do I feel tortured that I'm not with my divine mother? And I really should feel like that, and I think often we get so caught up in this life that we forget that we're not separated, but also we are in a sense. Priyank.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because Guruji tells us to really yearn and to love God with all our heart and cry for him and really call out to him as if he's your own. So really go to the deepest stages of devotion and longing. And this is he's effectively showing us what that means here, even as a child. And this book that Mahatma Mahasaya wrote for his Guru Ramakrishna Paramahansa, I really feel that in this chapter he's we're going to discuss in future episodes the importance Ramakrishna Paramahansa plays on our lineage, because there's lots of links. But I really feel that in this chapter that Guruji has really got into the Ramakrishna Paramahansa's be in the sense he's manifesting some of his qualities. And I'll explain. We'll have Chris will read something out a little bit from the book, which will explain why I think that. But a lot of Ramakrishna Paramahansa had actually quite a lot of influence on Mukunda and in his early life, and Bengal in that region. He was by far the most renowned spiritual master in Bengal at the time of his Guruji's birth, and a couple of decades before that. And as most of you will know, Ramakrishna Paramahansa is Swami Vivekananda's guru. And so Vivekananda and Master Mahasaya, they would both go to Ramakrishna Paramahansa as their gurus, and they were brother disciples, really. And so Vivekananda went to the West and came back, whereas Master Mahasaya stayed in Bengal. But in terms of this yearning, let's hear what Master Mahasaya in his book has said about of Ramakrishna Paramahansa. Chris, if you'd like to read that section of the book, I think it'll be quite nice.
As his love for God deepened, he began either to forget or to drop the formalities of worship. Sitting before the image, he would spend hours singing the devotional songs of great devotees of the Mother, such as Kamalakanta. I'm sure, Craig, you can pronounce that more significantly than I. And Ram Prasad. Those rhapsodical songs describing the direct vision of God only intensified Sri Ramakrishna's longing. He felt the pangs of a child separated from his mother. Sometimes in agony, he would rub his face against the ground and weep so bitterly that people, thinking he had lost his earthly mother, would sympathize with him in his grief. Sometimes in moments of skepticism, he would cry, "Art thou true, mother, or is it all fiction, merely poetry without any reality? If thou dost exist, why do I not see thee? Is religion a mere fantasy, and art thou only a figment of man's imagination?" Sometimes he would sit on the prayer carpet for 2 hours like an inert object. He began to behave in an abnormal manner, most of the time unconscious of the world. He almost gave up food, and sleep left him altogether.
So if you can just imagine, so this is Ramakrishna Paramahansa before he had his great darshan of Kalima, always the object of his devotion. It was Divine Mother at the time. And then he went a bit further and saw God as the infinite, not limited to the Divine Mother form. So this is before his darshan, or before his realization. So you can see the parallels there that young Mukunda is experiencing, because he doesn't see Divine Mother as Master Mahasaya does, and Ramakrishna also went through the same sort of thing with the Divine Mother that he was worshipping. So these words are just phenomenal, aren't they? Like it is rub his face against the ground and weep so bitterly. That people would think that he's insane. People did think that he's insane as well at the start, but then they realized that divinity is really manifesting in him. Chris?
It really makes me think about, meaning, and I've been watching a TV series, and there's a lot of like, what does it all mean? It's some sort of hospital TV series where, there's tons of people dying all the time, and it's very dramatic, and everybody's looking for meaning in life. And although traumatic and very real, painful experiences do we all have and, experience ourselves, as Yogananda, young Mukunda, experienced with his mother passing, that was what he compared this moment to. He compared the moment of this anguish of longing for Divine Mother with his own mother's passing. So although these moments in our lives are painful and, make us question life in many ways, like that's torturous, if we look internally, actually, it's just the knock on the door, isn't it? It's just the knock on the door to the higher purpose, which is union with God and the path, or what we're here to achieve, which is self-realization and union with God. So, it's Yogananda sort of telling us, like, this in a comparative way we can take from that. Look internally for the moments of strife in your life, because they'll push you towards God instead of pushing you away. Otherwise, we might never seek God, I guess, if we were going through life in some way, never challenged.
Very wise words, Chris. Very wise. Thank you. So yeah, upon hearing this and feeling this, he, as you said, Chris, earlier, he falls to the floor and he's moaning in agony. And then Master Mahasaya says, "Little sir, quiet yourself." And he describes him as being sympathetically distressed, which I find, I'm going to use the word interesting again. I do find it interesting because I personally wouldn't imagine a saint to be distressed. You imagine saints always being in a state of calm and unruffled by life's storms. But it's the sympathy, isn't it? It's that connection with everyone as one's own self, and you can feel that other person's pain as your own when you are so aligned and in union with spirit, right? So it's not surprising, but it also is at the same time. And then Guruji says that he clutches his feet as the sole raft of my rescue, which I just love. It reminds me of Guruji, and I think, how do we relate in that way to Guruji? Are we clutching to Guruji's feet as a sole raft of our rescue? Am I doing that day to day? And it made me introspect, actually. And if anyone wants any homework, that could maybe be an introspection question of the week or of the day, actually. We should maybe daily ask. Yeah, really, really touching.
Yeah, it reminds you also of God's Boatman, the poem, and how Guruji just explains the yearning and the promise that the Guru disciple promise that he'll come back and again.
Yeah.
Imagine if an outsider had viewed this in some way. They probably thought, wow, this kid is unhinged. He's tormented, he's crying, he's obviously making a scene, he's clutching at the feet. And maybe this is some artistic play that, Yogananda is providing for us. But it just struck me that, Yogananda is highly sensitive because he's highly attuned. And that could be interpreted maybe one way or another. But as young children, many times they're seen as dramatic and highly, highly sensitive. And then often what do we do is sort of punish them for it and not give that sympathy, that sympathetic responses, Master Mahasaya has given him here. He recognizes that he's in distress because he's actually missing his Divine Mother. So it just made me think, actually, how often do we see something and then interpret it in a sort of very sort of cold steel way and sort of shut it down as well? Whereas it's a very beautiful moment, isn't it? And very pure, very honest moment that Yogananda is sharing with us, very intimate moment that he's sharing with us. I just thought how many kids around the world are probably a little bit more sensitive and sort of beat it out of them and sort of through the cruel reality of life in many ways. But yeah, I hope if I was there, I would have reacted as sympathetic as the saint.
And then Guruji goes one step further as well, doesn't he? He doesn't just clutch at his feet. He then makes this plea to the master as well. And, he asks for his intercession and to ask if the Divine Mother holds him in any favor. Which, thinking about it, he's a young boy and it's quite gutsy, isn't it, really? But I suppose if you're in that moment of sheer anguish, you just pour out your whole heart and soul. But it says here that if having intercession with the divine is not easily bestowed, which I actually didn't know. I'm curious as to why. Priyank, what are your thoughts?
Mukunda saying that he essentially wants him to confirm that he's, seen he has the grace of Divine Mother, which is what he's saying. If I find any favor in her sight, what he's saying is the grace. So if you consider how many spiritual experiences and how many masters he's been around up till now, you'd imagine that if Mukunda really reflected, he doesn't need to ask again. But he's obviously so taken aback that Master Maharsha is able to openly communicate with Divine Mother. He doesn't need to wait for these grand moments in his life or revealings of various mystical things that have happened, i.e. in Mukunda's life, that he can just do it at will. I think that's what he's really, no, I wouldn't say jealous, but he really wants that in his own life, that he can just connect to Divine Mother at any given moment, or in front of anyone, or in any environment, or any time. But I think I just thought that for him to, with all the things that he's experienced in his life, to be asking that, what of us, right? Because or most of us, I'm sure, haven't experienced all the things that Mukunda had experienced up till this point in his life, but we don't, with this level of yearning, in front of the altar, ask for an intercession, or ask for Guru's, a sign that Divine Mother is grace's hand is on us. We just offer our prayers, but not with this much yearning usually.
It also says a lot about Master Mahashai, doesn't it? That Guruji asked him, like you say, he's met so many other saints, but it was Master Mahashai that he clearly felt that and saw the divine connection and conversation. So that's another little nod, isn't it, to Master Mahashai's state. But yeah, so he asks him for intercession, but the master stays silent, doesn't say anything, and then he goes on to say that he was actually convinced that he was in very intimate conversation with Divine Mother. Oh, Priyank, you're on mute.
About the point that you said about divine intercession not being one that's easily bestowed, you'd imagine that is because lots of often devotees ask for divine intercession from their guru, because they think that obviously the guru's got a direct line and they can manifest anything in their lives, be it mundane or spiritual, wholly spiritual, as Mukunda's is here. So then that may be the reason why it's not easily bestowed. So even though he could bestow it, he has to, Master Mahashai, for each one of the times that he has this request, or like a disciple has this request, he has to think, oh, is this really in the best interest of this disciple, and hence why there's another moment of silence here, silence moment, because he's now thinking about what this means, what it would mean for Mukunda to receive this intercession.
That's true, because it may not actually be in one's best interest to have that intercession at this point in time.
Could we liken it to the similarity between those who have a guru and those who maybe don't? Maybe the idea of having a guru is because your soul has been crying out to such an extent that God answers that sort of prayer, that inner dialogue, that that demand, that request of the soul to actually be liberated, and he sends the guru. So then it's maybe a similar thing going on here, where okay, well, you've got to really kind of knock on that door until it opens.
It's so touching, isn't it? Yeah. So Guruji then goes on to say that he actually felt humiliated, his deep humiliation, he says, that he has this realization that, his eyes can't see what this master can see. And he said that he, grips his feet shamelessly, and he's, beseeching him again and again to grace him and intervene for him. You can really imagine it. It's really the way it's written. Even if you're listening and you haven't read it before, I would go and read it. I'm sure you listeners have read it, but read again. It's so evoking. Yeah, Chris.
There's a story later on in the Autobiography of a Yogi when Yogananda meets Babaji, and there's kind of other stories that I could refer to where saints are present, and they're present amongst crowds, and the crowds don't pay them any attention. They're not just saints; they're divine incarnation. They're avatars. They're there among maybe among us if we're fortunate enough for that physical, our physical presence. And it made me think, like, wow, like you could be in a big event, or you could be walking past saint. You could be in the room with a saint who may be communing with Divine Mother, Father. They're actually in conversation with divinity. They're espousing divinity. You would maybe never notice because you're not attuned yourself. So just to go back to what I said again, he said, beyond reach of doubt, I was convinced that Master Mahasaya was in intimate converse with the Universal Mother. And then he said it was deep humiliation. So he realized that here is the saint in communion. So how did he realize that? Because he hasn't kind of thought, like we've said, we've a couple of times, like, not to labor the point, but he hasn't actually thought that about anybody else, has he? So he's truly convinced, but yet it is Yogananda and Mukunda that is the one attuned to be able to realize it, to really, beyond reasonable doubt, know it. And that's why he's truly humbled in this sense, because he recognized that. But obviously he's Paramahansa Yogananda and divinity, our guru himself. So not to state the obvious, but whenever I'm putting myself into that position, would I be in beyond reasonable doubt? Let's say, would I be humiliated to the extent that Yogananda is? I don't know. I give myself a shot, but it's probably an outside chance. But he's so much attuned with Master Mahasaya in this moment and with God, that he can see it, he knows it. So it's just
This is
nice.
what I love about this book. It gets you to introspect, doesn't it? And you really look at yourself when you read this book, and these true events that happened and that we're actually blessed enough to read about.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, so many lessons everywhere. So yes, so Guruji, young Mukunda is, clutching his feet, pleading. And then Master Mahasaya speaks again. So this is only the third time he has spoken, Master Mahasaya, in this time. And he says, I will make your plea to the beloved. And apparently he did a slow, compassionate smile as he spoke. I just imagine that. Imagine you're in this absolute pit of despair and anguish, and then someone says, I'm going to speak to Divine Mother. I'm going to give you a plea. Wow. And they had quite an effect. But before we go on to that, yeah, Chris.
Yeah, you said at the beginning of the podcast, like, this individual, this saint, is not to be confused with another, which is Lahiri Mahasaya, or the Ref Guru or lineage. But how much similarity is there? It just made me think, actually, there's a lot of similarity, because I don't think he was somebody who spoke very plainly, very astutely, few words, had a sort of this slow, compassionate smile, and the way that I'm perceiving this interaction to occur, just thought, wow, there's probably a lot of similarities, with the Lahiri Mahasaya, but maybe it's actually similarities with those who are really in divine attunement and in blissful, consciousness, and sort of in this world and of that world. Because Lahiri Mahasaya, his eyes in that picture, beautiful picture we have, his eyes are part closed. They're kind of slants, because he's sort of perceiving, how would you say, perceiving God, but yet with us, and he's perceiving us and with God. So that sort of reminds me actually a lot of Lahiri Mahasaya when I'm reading this about Master Mahasaya. You're on mute, Priyank.
The fact that the guru can make the pledge on your behalf because he's more in tune with God, or able to, is quite inspiring for us, isn't it? Because it's easier to commune with Yogananda than it is with God, which is often not something that's tangible, whereas the guru is tangible. We can see his image, we've heard his voice, we've heard him chanting. So it's a really good lesson for us that they've got the direct line. We've got the direct line, but we're just not able to use it. The Guruji has the direct line, so we can use that channel as
Exactly. And we're reminded here also in the book about the duality of life, because Mukunda's been in such storminess internally, and then he gets told that Master Mahasaya will speak to the Divine Mother, and then he says that he was released from this stormy exile in those powerful few words. Yeah, Priyank.
Mukunda's persistence is quite something, isn't it? Because he's saying, "Sir, remember your pledge." And in the previous paragraph, he kind of he besought him again and again for this grace. So it's another lesson for us. So we shouldn't, if we don't feel the grace within the first prayer of asking, then we should keep asking, perhaps a million times if we need to. And we do pretty much offer something similar in our prayers virtually every day. And if you imagine that's like 365 days to a year times 2, and then times however many years we are on this path, we too are also living this teaching, i.e. beseeching him again and again for his divine intercession.
But I guess also it depends how fervently we're praying, right? If it's a half-hearted, mechanical, not so much. But Priyank's raising his hand for all the listeners there. So even then, this makes me introspect. How much fervency do I really have? And, the zest, the zeal can always be leveled up, as I'd put it in today's language. So yes, so he's at his feet, and he says that, and the Mukunda. Before. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, there's one thing that he refers to her as the Universal Mother in this case. Is that Master Mahasaya was in intimate conversation with Universal Mother, not Divine Mother, or Kalima, or other names. Universal Mother. I think I could be mistaken. One of the few times that he refers to her as Universal Mother as opposed to the Divine Mother, which would imply that divine and universal are interchangeable terms. Such as practically what that could mean is a mother's love for her child is essentially the same love as the divine or the universal mother's love for her children, that are us, perhaps. And that's something that we also have to imbibe and show, not just for our children, but for creation and all of the souls in creation.
I'll come back to a point later on when we talk about another subject.
Oh, to be revealed. How curious. We all wait eagerly on tenterhooks, Chris. So yeah, I actually just now reading this on this podcast, I'm finding a bit of a kind of a joyous, comical, slightly comical-esque moment that Mukunda then says to the saint, remember your pledge, as if he's going to forget. But yeah, he reminds him not to forget. And then he said that he'll return soon. I don't know if I would say that to a saint personally, but then again, very different individuals.
It's quite demanding, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
We always thought not to be too demanding because it's rude. Apparently, you can be when it comes to matters of divinity. You must be demanding and persistent.
Yeah, he's so bubbling with devotion. It's kind of hard to not be anything but right in this moment, because he's trying to knock down the doors of heaven, in a sense. Like, how can you do that in a bad way? I don't know, maybe not, but he does later, Master Mahasaya come back to make a comment on young Mukunda's actions, and we're going to cover that in the next part, not quite in this part, but he does make a comment on this himself, because it is noted by the saint that Mukunda is being particularly pushy on this subject.
Indeed. And then Guruji also says that his voice rang, a joyful anticipation rang in my voice, which only a moment ago had been sobbingly choked with sorrow. There's a very drastic shift, isn't there? But again, that's the power of a saint's words, right? It changes your entire scope of being. So, yes. So then Mukunda descends and leaves, but before he leaves, yes, Chris.
So just on that, yeah, I did want to say, we know the power of the word from an earlier chapter where Mukunda was talking to his sister, and he was talking about the boils. I will have a boil of, I think, reasonable size, on my arm. And so it sort of came to pass, as it were, it manifested, and there it was. And then his mother sort of took him to one side and sort of said, look, don't do that again. You have to use your words for good, sort of thing. And here we have a saint who, Mukunda is in the presence of and is humbled by, and, knows, right, this is the real deal. He's really communing with Divine Mother. And he says the words, I will make your plea to the beloved. And there's something, and he says it himself, what power in those few words, the power of I will, that using your willpower and directing it toward that. And you've got somebody of that stature saying that, it's almost a guarantee, you're going to have, it's like Christmas is coming tomorrow, and it's almost inevitable of sorts that, yes, this is going to happen. So I'm sure, in this moment where he says, sir, remember your pledge, he's probably just elated with, borderline bliss, right? Like, I would, like any sort of small child would be, if they were told, look, your gifts are on the way, the greatest gift of your life is just on your way, they'd be like, yeah, jumping up and down in joy. It's because of the power of the words coming from the saint.
And for anyone listening, Priyank just did a very joyful little jig in his seat. It was wonderful. I will go back to YouTube just for this moment where Priyank jigged in his. I've never seen Priyank jig. That was wonderful.
I'm sure you have. Down Oxford Street, Lauren, perhaps.
Oh yes, maybe.
crossing the road when you're not supposed to.
Haphazardously, I must add. So yeah, Mukunda then leaves the saint's room and he descends down the stairway, and we actually find out where this building is. And curiously, it's 50 Amherst Street. And if it doesn't ring any bells, that's where their home used to be, the family home of Mukunda, but it was now the residence of Master Mahasaya. And it was also, he describes it as the scene of my mother's death, which I'd love to talk with you both, listeners, about this, about the scene of his mother's death. So does this mean, I'm not sure on this, does this mean this is where his mother actually died, or was this where he saw the vision of his mother? probably should have looked back on this before, but yeah, Chris, do you know?
So this is where they bought this residence. It's quite a large residence, isn't it? Quite significant size of a place. And they were making the preparations for the wedding there. I think that's either where the wedding, I'm sort of out of my depth here already, where the wedding reception of sorts would be. And the mother was there with the family essentially, and young Mukunda was away with his father, in a separate location. So yeah, this is, I believe, where the mother took ill and died very, very quickly thereafter.
Yes, you're right. I've
Angelic.
just looked at chapter 2, and it says mother was in Calcutta, joyously supervising the wedding preparations. Obviously, didn't give the address at this time, but we can put the two together and confidently say that she would have been at 50 Amherst Street. So yes, thank you, Chris. Yeah, Priyank, were you going to say something?
Yeah, just going to say Asiatic cholera, and I was going to say that we'll double check and definitely tell you for next episode. But thank you for doing that in advance, Lauren.
That's okay. Well, doing it on air at the same time. Yeah. So then we're let in to, again, his inner world, and he tells us, his human heart had been broken for the vanished mother, and here today my spirit had been as though crucified by the absence of the divine mother. Hallowed walls, silent witness of my grievous hurts and final healing.
If you think about and not to belittle, the death of a loved one, but that's over a course of time. You're born, the mother passed very quickly, unfortunately, in Yogananda's, young Mukunda's life. And that relationship, you have, and the divine mother was, manifesting through his mother, that divine love is, as we hear, comes through our friends and family. So, it's very, very real in divinity in a divine sense. But how many incarnations have we had? Time and time again, longing, all the strife for God, and that build up, I suppose, in some ways. Just what I'm thinking about now is that he says that he calls it as though crucified. It's very dramatic, very poignant. He's making a point on this to say it's this excruciating pain, and maybe that's just the precipice, of many incarnations. And obviously for Yogananda, it's very different. You're talking about a divine being. He's achieved realizations in previous lifetimes, and he's come here for us. So a little bit different, but that excruciating pain, this longing goes beyond all sort of, human, relationships and values, that it just is exponentially greater, because God knows how many incarnations. I don't want to think about it myself. How many incarnations I've had for this longing to build up.
Yeah, it's quite a thought, isn't it? Yeah. Another thing I also thought about when I was reading this was, how did the family home become to be Master Mahashaya's residency? And Priyank is always a couple steps ahead of me, and you found it, didn't you, Priyank, in the section of the gospel that you've been talking about?
So apparently he was a teacher for the vast majority of his life, a principal, and he left the last 27 years of his life. He was basically writing the book, and he bought this. It was called the Morton Institute, I believe, and it was, as this is a 4-storied house, which is Mukunda's, where Mukunda lived, especially during the wedding procession. And so he bought it for this school, and we're going to talk about the school a bit later. So as you say, he was quite a a renowned educator. He was principal of many schools, but he didn't stay long at those schools because lots of disagreements between him and management about the style of education and results, and the importance of pilgrimages, and there's various things that happened, which meant that he kept moving different schools. So he really wanted to establish his own school, and this is what he did. Yeah. But I've found quite a cool bit in this, because it says that he generally occupied a staircase room at the top of it, and cooking his own meal, which consisted only of milk and rice without variation, and attended to all his personal needs himself. So he basically lived in the schools, worked in the school, and had lived an exceptionally simple life. Yeah, we'll talk more about the school a bit later when Mukunda actually mentions it in the autobiography.
We've got so much to look forward to, haven't we, in this chapter? And yeah, Chris.
Now that we're on the topic of this this building, the building 50 Amherst Street, I wondered, just how much amplification the location would have had on young Mukunda, given that he's meeting Mahasaya in the location where he's got these memories, he's got this, I suppose, anchorage of memory into the house of his own mother, and the passing of that, and that may have been an amplification to open his heart to really, to feel that anguish, to feel that longing for Divine Mother. It's like a breakthrough in a sense, that whilst it was terribly heartbreaking, maybe that's really that sort of push, toward being in this moment, to have the experience that we're going to talk about in the next part of this chapter. It doesn't maybe seem separate to my mind, no coincidence.
You actually raise a really good point there. I hadn't thought about that. But yes, it's very cyclical, isn't it? And it's motion. And, cycles often repeat themselves until we're ready to let go or overcome or burn the karma, untie the knots, however you say it. And it does feel like that, actually, doesn't it? He's then brought to this, as Guruji said, all the hurt becomes the healing, and it's in that same place.
Yeah, with reference to that hurt and healing, he referenced it in two ways. So he said, my human heart was broken for his vanished birth mother, essentially. And then he said, my spirit had been not just hurt, he said crucified. So his human heart essentially broken, which is like a very emotional, gross kind of feeling of something that's very specific to this incarnation and this relationship that you might establish with a birth mother. But then we have his spirit has been crucified, which is a very, it transcends lifetimes, isn't it? Which is why he's used, I think, a much stronger word. His spirit was crucified by the absence of Divine Mother, and hence, the soul is not progressing as he would like, and he's calling that a crucifixion, essentially, which is quite a way of putting it, isn't it?
It's very strong, isn't it? Yeah. But yes, as I was saying before as well, we do have so much to look forward to in this chapter, and of course the whole book. But yeah, there's so much to dive into. Really looking forward to it. And I think
the last words of this section are the final healing. So he's going to get healed from these, heartfelt emotions, and also spiritual crucifixion.
I'm trying to find it in the book where there is light. Great little book. I literally read, I'm trying to find it where it was, this quote. Essentially, it was saying, if you find yourself feeling agitated by by the actions of your loved ones, look internally, because in there you'll find truth, as to why you're being agitated. There's many, many lessons in that, and it, to look at your likes and dislikes, and then kind of introspect on them, because that's a pretty quick way to evolve in a sense. And think about it in this way, that there's great hurt in your life. Why? Why is that great hurt? It could be a million different reasons, but ultimately it's for this reason, that the separation from Divine Mother, like, is ultimately coming back to that, isn't it? So yeah, I just wanted to share that because I read it literally yesterday. Can't remember where exactly in the book, but it's in there. It's in there somewhere. Wonderful book, full of lessons. Of course.
And on that very wisdomous note, we will end the episode here for today. And you can join us next week where you find out more what happens next. God, that sounded a bit like a TV show, didn't it? Find out what happens next. But yes, we will explore more and delve into the book. And we very much look forward to it. So thank you so much, Chris and Priyank, and thank you everyone who listened. And we'll meet next week.
Thank you, Lauren.